Near the end of last year, I was in a real need of a break from online games. More specifically, online free-to-play games. It was around October when one day while I was waiting in between matches that I started to ask myself, what am I doing? I've been playing free-to-play consistently for a number of years now. I would tend to get home either tired or burned out, and aside from whatever else I needed to take care of around the house, the most I can do was play some simple free-to-play game to turn my brain off with, and also to get my daily dose of dopamine from. Free-to-play games tend to get us into some type of daily routine in an almost dangerously addictive way. You log in and get your daily login rewards. There are also daily missions, and in some games, weekly missions as well. This can almost feel like a second job at times. And that's how I started to see my own experience with them. The last free-to-play game that I was stuck on was Gundam Battle Operation 2, which also has daily missions and rewards, along with loot boxes that are called supply drops. It also adds a new mobile suit every week to create a fear of missing out in order to get players to spend money on these supply drops. For the record, I've never spent any of my own real-world money on these games, but that of course means that I therefore had to play daily in order to earn enough of the in-game currency. And I had gotten tired of this daily routine. That, and it also felt like in every match I was playing in the exact same box, with players sticking to the exact same meta every time. In the process, I probably lost some brain cells doing this repeatedly. Anyway, in order to get out of this daily post-work grind, I decided to return to single-player games. If you're watching this video some 10 or 20 years in the future, single-player games were what developers often made before the always online free-to-play service model corrupted the industry by putting easy dollar signs in their eyes. For my first attempt at playing a full-length single-player game from start to finish, I chose the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I loaded up the game and then I was hit with the harsh reality. After all these years playing free-to-play games, I had been mentally conditioned to play only a certain type of game with a certain type of dopamine feedback loop. And although Mass Effect's RPG leveling system is not all that complicated, I didn't exactly have the headspace to relearn all the mechanics. So I had to take baby steps in order to get back into the old single-player games like Mass Effect. I needed a game that was relatively simple and didn't require me to relearn too much.
Wake up, Buttercup.
That's where Halo 3 ODST came in. The gameplay is relatively simple, and there are no RPG leveling systems. The most complicated it can get is when it comes to deciding which weapons you want to use. There are two sides to Halo 3 ODST. The first consisting of the traditional Halo linear missions, and the second being set in between missions and an abandoned city in the middle of the night that you must navigate through alone behind enemy lines. The campaign isn't all that long, usually taking about 6 hours, so it doesn't take up too much of your time. This was my first step in restoring my attention span for full-length campaigns, and it also helped to restore some of my creativity since there are no metas you're socially obligated to follow in some way, like how some online gaming communities expect of everyone. So there was more room for freedom and creativity.
What can I say? It was a hell of a night.
No! No! No!
The next single-player game that I got into was Alan Wake. Aside from it having some suspenseful combat moments, I wouldn't exactly call it scary. I think the wind heard moving through the trees of the Pacific Northwest is probably the scariest thing about it. The gameplay is also pretty simple, and there are no RPG leveling systems. So again, an easy game for me to get back into. Just point your flashlight at enemies and know when to dodge attacks. The missions are divided up into the form of 6 episodes, along with 2 extra DLC episodes. If you're kinda into scary games, but not that scary and that don't give you a lot of jump scares, then I would say that Alan Wake is a good game to get into. The campaign is a little longer than Halo 3 ODST, which helped to further increase my attention span. To keep my single-player mindset momentum going, I decided to stay with the series and played Alan Wake's American Nightmare next. It plays pretty similar to the original. There are once again no complicated leveling systems, and this time around the game focuses more on the action than on the suspense. The game leaves the Pacific Northwest for an isolated desert town this time around. It's a smaller story that feels more like an arcade game, but it's still fun. There is also an added horde mode, which might actually be a little scarier than the campaign. The only downside is that there's no co-op.
Curfew is still in effect! Go back to your homes!
What's going on? Tell us the truth!
Enough lies! No! Run! All of you!
A Plag Tail Requiem was next on my list. Now, here is where the RPG elements started to get reintroduced to me. It's not exactly an RPG, but there are some skills and perks that you can level up as you progress through the game. The story is also really good. It is a linear adventure game set in 14th century France. I wouldn't exactly call it a horror game, but it does have some horror elements, with its plot somewhat dealing with the 14th century Black Death. It was at this point I was beginning to feel more comfortable playing through full-length campaigns, and since it is more of a stealth game, a Plag Tail also helped in restoring some of my patience for games where I can't just jump in guns blazing and committing war crimes. Control is perhaps the best Remedy game that I've ever played. Alan Wake 2 might be better, but I have yet to play it, so the jury is still out on that one for me. And nonetheless, Control is a game that has some of the most fun gameplay that I have ever experienced. Moving objects with your mind while flying in the air, using debris and rubble as a shield, and a gun that can take on multiple forms, all work so well together. It almost feels like a superhero game, but with a secretive corporate bureaucratic setting, along with a dose of the X-Files sprinkled on top. This time around, the game did have a leveling system when it came to Jessie's powers and her gun. It also has mods for your gun, along with its different firing modes, as well as mods for Jessie herself. Still, it wasn't anything too complicated, and by this time around, I had successfully started to rewire my brain to be able to play RPGs again.
That was awesome.
Finally came time for the big one, the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. 3 games in one, with each a leveling system, along with the scale for Renegade and Paragon dialogue options. I would say that the most complex of the 3 has to be the first one. Mass Effect 2 and 3 sort of had their leveling systems trimmed down by comparison. Admittedly, however, its mechanics are nothing complicated. But again, I had struggled to return to single-player RPGs for the longest time, because of all the free-to-play live service games.
Somehow I always knew I'd see the Normandy again.
So I started up the game. For appearance, I chose the default Commander Shepard to save time. As far as all the games mentioned in this video, Mass Effect is the most story and lore focused of the bunch, so there were a lot of terms I had to recall. Anyway, through the course of about 2 months, maybe a little more, I stuck with the trilogy, got invested in the story, did all the side quests, and even made sure to get as many of the trophies as I could in my first playthrough. And finally, I got to the end, something that I was unable to do before because I had become accustomed to mostly playing online matches that would barely last 8 or 9 minutes each. What I wanted to do for this video is go over how I was able to rewire my mindset in order to return to single player games after having spent too much time online. It was almost like a form of rehab for gaming in a way. To quickly summarize my entire journey, I started off with Halo 3 ODST to serve as a soft reintroduction to full-length single-player games. Alan Wake increased my attention span for being able to play longer games and missions that took longer than 10 minutes. A Plag Tail got me back into leveling and skill mechanics, while also forcing me to learn how to be patient through its stealth sections. Control got me used to having slightly deeper leveling systems. And finally, the Mass Effect Legendary Edition was a test to see if I could manage to stay focused long enough to complete a game that takes up to around 100 hours the first time around. In all my time playing these games, not once was I frustrated or annoyed. Even in some of the more challenging parts, like in Control, I was genuinely happy. Unlike with online multiplayer games, where I would sometimes get annoyed or frustrated for a variety of reasons. Now, I admit that all these games, with the exception of Control and a Plag Tail, were games that I have played before. But I think that when needing to pull away from online free-to-play games, that returning to something familiar can help in rewiring our brain, because it gives us a starting off point. Throughout my 6-month-long journey, I was reminded of the issues I have with always online games. While I do enjoy the occasional multiplayer match and co-op missions, games that can only be played online are dependent on too many variables in order to be fun. Aside from needing to have a stable internet connection and servers working properly, you also have to worry about the behavior of other players. Whereas with offline games, none of that is an issue, and you can pause the game whenever you want. You can enjoy the game at your own pace and play however you want, or at least as much as the game lets you. If you're feeling burnt out from always playing online games, but feel stuck, then I recommend trying some offline single-player games, either new or old. If you still want to play with friends, then try sticking to fun PvE co-op games instead of PvP. PvP can be fun, but the core idea of PvP is pinning players against one another, which can lead to stress and frustration. For example, maybe you had a long day at your job, doing mind-numbing work for 8 or more hours. And then you had to drive in traffic before getting home. Do you really think PvP is going to help with your stress when there's at least a 50-50 chance you're going to lose? I highly doubt it. So try sticking to co-op with friends or single-player games to unwind. It's either that or just put the controller down.